Eleanor Pham had lived in Mapleton Heights for 42 years, long before there was a homeowners association, before the cookie-cutter McMansions sprouted up around her modest ranch home, and certainly before Diane Kensington appointed herself the neighborhood's self-proclaimed standards enforcer. At 87, Eleanor had earned the right to let her garden grow a little wild and to sit peacefully on her front porch, without being harassed about property values and community aesthetics. But on that fateful Thursday afternoon in May, peace was the last thing Eleanor would find. The doorbell rang just as Eleanor was finishing her afternoon tea, the familiar chime cutting through the quiet house where she had lived alone since her husband passed 5 years ago. With her arthritis flaring up, she moved slowly toward the door, her silver-streaked black hair, which hadn't been cut in nearly 8 months, cascading down her back in a thick braid that reached her waist. "Coming, coming," she called out, annoyed by the impatient second ring that followed. Eleanor didn't receive many visitors these days, not since her grandson Jason had moved to the city for work, promising to visit every weekend but managing only once a month when his schedule allowed. When she opened the door, Eleanor was greeted by Diane Kensington's artificial smile. The HOA president stood on her doorstep in crisp white capri pants and a pastel cardigan, clipboard in hand. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Pham," Diane said with practiced politeness that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, but we need to discuss a few community violations that have been brought to the board's attention." Eleanor sighed. "I told you before, Ms. Kensington, my home was built before your association existed. The grandfather clause." Yes, I'm well aware of your special circumstances," Diane cut in, her smile tightening. "But certain standards of appearance apply to all homes in Mapleton Heights, grandfathered or not. Your garden is becoming a genuine eyesore, and frankly, it's affecting property values on the entire block." Eleanor bristled. The garden had been her husband's pride and joy, and she maintained it as best she could despite her arthritis. True, it wasn't the manicured showcase it once was, but the native wildflowers she planted attracted butterflies and hummingbirds, unlike the sterile, chemical-treated lawns that dominated the neighborhood now. "My garden stays as it is," Eleanor said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me." Diane's hand shot out, blocking the door. "Actually, there's another matter. The board has received complaints about your personal appearance as well." Her eyes flicked meaningfully to Eleanor's long braid. "My appearance?" Eleanor repeated incredulously. "Since when does your precious HOA dictate how I wear my hair?" "When it becomes a reflection on our community standards," Diane replied smoothly. "Section 8.3 of the bylaws clearly states that residents must maintain a presentable appearance when visible from common areas. Your excessively long hair is considered unconventional for someone of your age." Eleanor couldn't believe what she was hearing. "That's absurd. You can't possibly." "I've brought the community stylist with me," Diane continued as if Eleanor hadn't spoken, gesturing toward a young woman standing by the car parked in the driveway. "The HOA is even covering the costs as a courtesy." "You must be out of your mind," Eleanor said, trying to close the door, but Diane was surprisingly strong for her slender frame. "Mrs. Pham, we can do this the easy way, or I can begin issuing daily fines for your multiple violations," Diane threatened, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're on a fixed income, aren't you? How long could you afford to pay those before you'd be forced to sell?" Eleanor felt her heart racing, a cold panic settling in her chest. She'd heard rumors of Diane's tactics, how the Jacobsons had been forced to remove their wheelchair ramp because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing, how the Wilsons had to give up the rescue dog because it exceeded the weight limit by 2 pounds. What Eleanor couldn't know, was that her grandson Jason would arrive unexpectedly in less than an hour, bringing with him his boyfriend Luke, who happened to be the mayor's son. And what Diane Kensington didn't know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her petty, power-hungry life. Eleanor's hands trembled as she gripped the armrests of her dining room chair. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Yet here she was, a towel draped around her shoulders while Diane Kensington circled her like a vulture eyeing its prey. "Lisa is one of the top stylists in the county," Diane was saying, gesturing to the uncomfortable-looking young woman unpacking scissors and combs on Eleanor's kitchen counter. "She does my highlights every month. You're in good hands." Lisa offered a weak smile. "I just need to wet your hair first, Mrs. Pham. Then we'll do a nice bob that frames your face. Very elegant for a woman your age." Eleanor felt tears threatening. Her long hair was her last connection to her Vietnamese heritage, a tradition passed down from her mother and grandmother before her. In her culture, it symbolized wisdom and longevity. More personally, her late husband Henry had loved her hair, often brushing it for her in their quiet evenings together. "I don't consent to this," Eleanor said firmly, her voice stronger than she felt. "You have no right." Diane's smile didn't waver. "Actually, we do. Your signature is on the deed transfer acknowledging HOA governance when you refinanced in 2012. That was a mistake on our part, letting grandfathered properties slide when ownership documents are updated, but it's legally binding. Eleanor had no memory of signing such a document. The refinance had been handled by her son before he moved overseas, with Eleanor signing a stack of papers she barely understood. Had she unwittingly surrendered her independence? "I'm calling my grandson," Eleanor declared, reaching for her phone. Diane swiftly moved it out of reach. "After we're finished. This won't take long." "Please, Miss Kensington," Lisa interrupted, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Maybe we should reschedule if Mrs. Pham is upset." "Nonsense. She'll feel much better once it's done. Everyone does." Diane's voice hardened. "And remember, Lisa, your Sellen's contract with Mapleton Heights depends on your cooperation with the board." The young stylist's face fell as she reluctantly began wetting Eleanor's hair with the spray bottle. Eleanor closed her eyes, silent tears rolling down her weathered cheeks as she felt the first horrifying snip of scissors against her neck. With each cut, decades of history fell to the floor, her husband's gentle hands brushing out her hair, her mother teaching her to braid it properly as a child, the crown of silver that she had earned through a life well lived. 70 minutes later, Eleanor sat motionless, staring at her reflection in the hand mirror Diane triumphantly held up. A stranger looked back at her, an old woman with a blunt, shin-length bob that emphasized every line in her face. "See, much more appropriate," Diane said with satisfaction. "Clean, manageable, age-appropriate. The board will be pleased." Lisa silently packed her supplies, shame evident in her downcast eyes. She mumbled an apology as she slipped out the door, leaving Eleanor alone with Diane. "Now about that garden," Diane continued, checking her clipboard. "We scheduled the landscaping crew for Monday. They'll remove those unsightly wildflowers and install proper boxwoods and—" The sound of a car door slamming in the driveway cut her off. "Grandma?" A male voice called as keys jingled in the front door lock. "Surprise visit." Jason Pham stepped into his grandmother's house, his smile instantly vanishing when he saw Eleanor's devastated expression and shorn hair scattered across the floor. Behind him stood a tall, well-dressed man who surveyed the scene with growing alarm. "What the hell happened here?" Jason demanded, rushing to Eleanor's side and kneeling before her. "Grandma, are you okay?" "Heavy with compliance," Diane answered smoothly, extending her hand. "Diane Kensington, president of the Mapleton Heights Homeowners Association. Your grandmother's appearance was in violation of our community standards." Jason stared at her in disbelief. "You cut her hair? Without her permission?" "With full legal authority," Diane corrected, though her confident demeanor faltered slightly as she noticed the expensive suit worn by Jason's companion. "And you are?" "Luke Harrington," the man replied coldly, stepping forward. "Son of Mayor Charles Harrington and Assistant District Attorney for the county." He placed a protective hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "And you just committed assault against the woman who will soon be my grandmother-in-law." The color drained from Diane's face. There must be some misunderstanding. The HOA bylaws clearly state. "State it for your defense attorney," Luke interrupted, already pulling out his phone. "Because you're going to need one." Jason gathered the fallen, silver-streaked locks from the floor, gently placing them in a plastic bag while Eleanor sat in shocked silence, one hand repeatedly touching her newly shortened hair as if unable to believe it was gone. "My father considers elder abuse a personal priority," Luke continued, his voice deadly calm as he photographed Eleanor's cut hair and tear-stained face. He pushed for the increased penalties that went into effect last year. 5 years minimum for elder abuse with aggravating factors. "This isn't abuse," Diane protested, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "It's community standards enforcement. Forcing your way into an elderly woman's home and cutting off her hair against her will?" Jason's voice shook with rage. "What would you call it?" As the reality of her situation began to sink in, Diane Kensington's perfectly composed facade started to crack. The mayor's son, the assistant district attorney, the engagement to Eleanor Pham's grandson. She had chosen the wrong grandmother to bully. By Saturday morning, the story of Eleanor Pham's forced haircut had spread through Mapleton Heights like wildfire. Neighbors who had long feared Diane Kensington's tyrannical rule over the HOA were suddenly finding their courage, sharing their own stories of intimidation and overreach. The community Facebook group, usually dominated by Diane's announcements and warnings, was overflowing with outraged comments and calls for her resignation. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by Jason, Luke, and Mayor Charles Harrington himself, a tall, distinguished man with the same intense eyes as his son. The mayor had canceled his weekend appearances to address the situation personally. "Mrs. Pham, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am that this happened to you in our community," Mayor Harrington said, his voice gentle but his expression thunderous. "I assure you there will be consequences." Eleanor nodded, her hand unconsciously reaching up to touch her shortened hair. She barely spoken since yesterday's incident, a shock still evident in her eyes. We're pursuing criminal charges, Luke explained, spreading legal documents across the table. Assault, elder abuse, false imprisonment, and criminal trespass for starters. The district attorney is reviewing the case personally. Jason squeezed his grandmother's hand. And we're filing a civil suit against both Diane and the HOA board for damages. Mayor Harrington leaned forward. But more importantly, Mrs. Pham, what can we do for you right now? How can we make this right? Eleanor looked up, finding her voice at last. I want my independence back. I want to be free of these people who think they can control every aspect of my life. Her voice grew stronger with each word, and I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Jason answered it to find Lisa, the stylist, standing nervously on the porch. I'm so sorry to intrude, she said, twisting her hands together. But I couldn't sleep last night. I brought something for Mrs. Pham, and I need to do the right thing. She was invited in, and with trembling hands, she placed a flash drive on the table. I record all my sessions for my portfolio. With client permission, she explained. Diane knew this. She made me turn it off, but I didn't. The entire incident is here, including her threats to me and Mrs. Pham. She took a deep breath, and I'm willing to testify. The mayor exchanged glances with his son. This changed everything. Across town, Diane Kensington was in full damage control mode, frantically calling emergency meetings with the HOA board members in her immaculate living room. This is a complete overreaction, she insisted to the 5 uncomfortable-looking board members. We were simply enforcing the standards we're all obligated to uphold. If we make an exception for one person, the entire neighborhood could deteriorate. You cut an elderly woman's hair against her will, Diane, Margaret Wilson said, the first board member to openly challenge her in years. That's not in any bylaw I've ever read. The bylaws give us broad enforcement powers. Not that broad, interrupted Gerald Fisher, the board treasurer. I've consulted our attorney this morning. Not only do we exceed our authority, but we're all potentially liable. The HOA insurance won't cover intentional acts like this. Diane's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide her growing panic. You're blowing this out of proportion. Once everyone calms down. The mayor's office called me directly, Gerald continued, removing his glasses to rub his eyes tiredly. They're launching an investigation into all HOA activities for the past 5 years. All our records, all our enforcement actions, all our financial transactions. The blood drained from Diane's face. The selective enforcement against families she disliked. The landscaping contracts awarded to her brother-in-law's company. The administrative fees she'd been collecting for expedited approvals. They can't do that, she whispered. They already are, Margaret replied, standing up. And we're cooperating fully. The board has voted. We've accepted your resignation, effective immediately. My resignation? I haven't resigned. Then you're terminated, Gerald said firmly, and we've frozen the HOA accounts pending investigation. As her former allies filed out of her home, Diane's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her husband. Have you seen the news? Call me immediately. With shaking hands, she opened her laptop and navigated to the local news site. Her stomach dropped as she saw the headline. Mayor announces special investigation into HOA abuses following elder assault. Below was a still image from Lisa's video, showing Diane standing over a tearful Eleanor, scissors in hand. The article mentioned that the mayor's office had already received dozens of complaints from Mapleton Heights residents since the story broke, with allegations ranging from selective enforcement to financial improprieties. Diane closed the laptop, her mind racing. This would blow over. It had to. She had friends in high places. She donated to the right campaigns, attended the right charity events, maintained the right social connections. Her phone rang, her husband again. She answered it, forcing confidence into her voice. Darling, this is just a misunderstanding. Your country club membership has been suspended, he interrupted, his voice tight with fury. The Harringtons are on the board. Charles Harrington has been mayor for 12 years, Diane. 12 years. Everyone in this town owes him favors, not you. But I just got a call from my boss. They're reconsidering my position because of the negative publicity. Do you understand what you've done? To me? To us? As the full impact of her actions began to register, Diane's perfectly constructed world started to crumble around her. She had built her identity on her position of authority, on being feared and respected in equal measure. Now in the span of 24 hours, it was all slipping away. And the worst was yet to come. Her doorbell rang, and through the frosted glass, she could make out the unmistakable silhouette of a police officer. Karma, it seemed, had finally caught up with Diane Kensington. Eleanor Pham's garden bloomed defiantly in the June sunshine. Wild columbines and black-eyed Susans danced in the breeze, while native grasses created a gentle, rustling soundtrack that accompanied the hummingbirds darting between feeders. It had been 3 weeks since the incident that locals now simply called the haircut, and Eleanor sat on her porch swing, watching as neighborhood children planted milkweed seedlings along her fence line. "These will attract monarchs," Mrs. Pham explained 10-year-old Sophia Rodriguez, whose family had received a violation notice from Diane just last month for their daughter's basketball hoop. "My science teacher says they're endangered because they don't have enough habitat." Eleanor smiled, touching her hair, which now sported a custom silk scarf sent by a local Vietnamese community group that had heard her story. "Then we must give them a safe place, mustn't we?" Since the incident, Eleanor's home had become an unexpected hub of community connection. Neighbors who had previously only exchanged distant waves now stopped by with casseroles, offers of help, and their own HOA horror stories. The isolation that had been slowly suffocating her after her husband's death had dissipated, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Across the street, Margaret Wilson, now the interim HOA president, approached with a folder tucked under her arm. "Good morning, Eleanor," she called, smiling at the children. "Your garden helpers are doing a wonderful job." "They're teaching me about conservation," Eleanor replied, gesturing for Margaret to join her on the porch. "What brings you by today?" Margaret sat down, opening the folder. "The board has unanimously approved the new bylaws amendments. I wanted you to be the first to see them." She handed over a document titled the Eleanor Pham Protection Clauses. Eleanor adjusted her reading glasses, scanning the pages with growing emotion. The amendments explicitly prohibited HOA interference with personal appearance, established protection for grandfathered properties, required resident approval for any aesthetic regulations, and created an ethics committee with resident oversight. "We've also established a community garden program," Margaret continued. "We're converting that empty lot by the playground into native plant demonstration gardens, and we'd like you to be the honorary chairperson, if you're willing." Eleanor dabbed at her eyes. "I would be honored." As they discussed the details, Jason's car pulled into the driveway. He and Luke approached, both wearing formal suits. "How did it go?" Eleanor asked as they joined her on the porch. Luke's professional demeanor softened as he bent to kiss Eleanor's cheek. "Diane Kensington has been formally charged with assault, elder abuse, and false imprisonment." The judge denied her attorney's motion to dismiss. She seemed shocked that her country club connections could make this disappear, Jason added, loosening his tie. "Her husband wasn't in court today. He's filed for separation," Margaret supplied. "It's all over town. Apparently, he's also facing an ethics investigation at his firm for trying to pressure certain board members to drop their cooperation with the police." Eleanor shook her head sadly. She took no joy in the Kensington family's collapse despite what Diane had done. "And the HOA investigation?" Proceeding, Luke confirmed. "The forensic accountants have already identified numerous financial improprieties. The landscaping contract kickbacks alone will likely result in additional charges." Meanwhile, across town, Diane Kensington sat alone in her spotless kitchen, surrounded by the trappings of her formerly perfect life. Her husband had moved to a hotel, her phone had stopped ringing, and her social calendar, once filled with luncheons, committee meetings, and charity galas, was conspicuously empty. The local newspaper lay open on the counter, featuring a front-page story about the Mapleton Heights Renaissance following the HOA restructuring. There was a photo of Eleanor in her garden, surrounded by neighborhood children and newly planted flowers, looking vibrant despite her shortened hair. Diane's attorney had called that morning with the news that the district attorney was not interested in a plea deal. "They're making an example of you," he'd explained grimly. "The mayor is personally invested in this case." Her cell phone chimed, a rare occurrence these days. It was a text from Lisa, the stylist. "I've been subpoenaed to testify. I'm sorry, but I have to tell the truth." Diane didn't respond. What could she say? The security camera footage was damning enough, but with Lisa's testimony and recording, her defense was crumbling. She jumped at the sound of the doorbell. These days, it usually meant more bad news. Through the window, she recognized a courier with another legal envelope. More motions, more depositions, more demands for documents. As the sun began to set over Mapleton Heights, two very different scenes unfolded. In Eleanor's backyard, tables had been set up for an impromptu community dinner. Jason and Luke had brought takeout from Eleanor's favorite Vietnamese restaurant, and neighbors had added dishes of their own. Children chased fireflies while adults chatted, the conversation flowing more freely than it had in years under Diane's watchful eye. Mayor Harrington and his wife had stopped by briefly, bringing Eleanor a beautiful orchid and the news that the city council had unanimously approved a grant for senior-friendly community gardens inspired by her story. "You started something important," the mayor told her, raising a toast. "You reminded us all that communities are built on respect and kindness, not rules and fear." In her empty home, Diane picked at a solitary microwave dinner, the silence broken only by the occasional ping of another social media notification, another former friend or acquaintance publicly distancing themselves from her. The presidents of 3 neighboring HOAs had released a joint statement condemning her actions and announcing a review of their own enforcement policies. Her phone rang, an actual call, not a text. Diane lunged for it, desperate for human contact. "Hello, Mrs. Kensington. This is Channel 5 News. We're working on a feature about HOA overreach across the state, and we'd like to give you the opportunity to comment on the allegations." Diane hung up, her hand shaking. Tomorrow, she would meet with another attorney, her third since this nightmare began. Her savings were dwindling, legal bills mounting, and her future growing darker by the day. As night fell completely, Eleanor Pham sat surrounded by new friends and old family, her shortened hair now a badge of resilience rather than a mark of victimization. Jason and Luke announced their wedding date, inviting everyone present to attend. "And we have one more announcement," Luke added, smiling at Eleanor. "We decided to buy the house next door. We're moving back to Mapleton Heights." The cheer that went up carried across the neighborhood, a sound of genuine community that had been missing for far too long.